So during this screencast, we're going to look at the psychodynamic explanation of gender development. First slide you can see in front of you, so I've selected these two pictures, two major influences on behaviour from the psychodynamic approach. First of all, on the left you've got childhood, and the second on the right you've got the conscious and the unconscious mind. Now today we're going to look at a kind of combination between the two of them, so both of these ideas are relevant. So, if you think back to year 12, we already know a little bit about the psychodynamic explanation, and as we know, there are a number of psychosexual stages which Freud said everyone goes through, and there's conflict at each of these possible stages. As a reminder of what their stages are, so we've got OAPLG. Our way of remembering this is old age pensioners love Guinness, hence you've got the pint on the right hand side, and that stands for the oral stage, anal stage, phallic, latency, genital stage. Now the oral and the anal stage, obviously the first two stages, we're not really going to discuss them today, and the reason is that Freud said that gender identity doesn't really exist at these stages and there's no visible difference between the behaviour of the two sexes. He said the two sexes were quite comparable in those first two stages. So that brings us to the phallic stage, which is around 4 to 5 years old, and during this stage, Freud said that the libido, which means the life force, increasingly focused on the genitals. So phallic is, almost another word for the genitals. He said gender identity begins to develop at this stage. And as you can see, you've got the boys on the left-hand side. Freud said they go through an Oedipus complex. And girls on the right-hand side, he said that girls go through the Electra complex. So I'll introduce you first of all to the Oedipus complex. As we know, Freud focused a lot more on males and men's behaviour than he did on women's, so it probably comes as no surprise that he came up with this idea of the Oedipus complex first, and the Electra complex feels a little bit more tagged on. We will come back to the Electra complex, but first of all looking at the Oedipus. So Oedipus was a mythical king. He killed his father and he married his mother. Now we're not going to look at anything quite as extreme as that today, but this is the Oedipus complex kind of in a nutshell. So Freud had this idea that young males, so boys, during that phallic stage, they had a kind of sexual desire and an attraction to their mother. Now this was unconscious, I need to add, and they craved their mother's sole attention. So if that sounds a little bit strange, keep in the back of your mind 4 to 5 year old boys craving their mum's sole attention sounds a bit more reasonable. The sexual part, obviously he said that was unconscious. They didn't consciously kind of desire their mothers in that way. They had, because of this attraction, a kind of loathing of the father. He sees that the father has access to the mother and he hates him for that. He really loathes him. They see the fathers as the rival for their mother's attention, and they wish their fathers were dead. In addition to this, the son fears that his father will discover his desire, so they have this constant anxiety about feeling this way, and the son's afraid of essentially dad removing his penis. So castration anxiety, we all know what castration is in terms of you might have had pets, dogs, cats for example. Castration meaning removing of the genitals. So the son's living in fear, he's worried, he's anxious about his father, and this is where the conflict lies. So this takes us on to how they identify with the father and how they internalise the father's behaviours. So the unconscious conflict going on with the boys at this age is their, as I said, unconscious desire for their mother versus their fear of their father. And this is what causes the conflict. So to resolve this conflict, the boy gives up the desire and identifies with his father. Identification meaning internalising the male gender identity, so taking on those attitudes, taking on those behaviours to become more masculine, to become more male. Now Freud said if this doesn't happen, then it would cause sexual identity confusion. So if they don't take on these behaviours, if they don't have a father figure to identify with, or this conflict isn't resolved fully, then it would end up with them being confused about their identity, and Freud would say this might lead to homosexuality, for example. Remember, at the time homosexuality was not legal, it was very frowned upon, so this is Freud's kind of explanation for that behaviour. On a side note, just before we move on to the Electra complex, you need to make sure in your answers you always link it back to gender identity. So it's not enough just to explain the process itself, but you need to link it back to how they identify, how they internalise and show this new gender identity. So moving on to the Electra complex, again, just as we saw Oedipus was a mythical king, Electra is a mythical princess and she killed her own mother. So in terms of what happened with the girls, so Freud said that young girls, 4 to 5 years old, they're initially attracted to their mother, but this ends, this stops when she realises the mother does not have a penis. The penis is a symbol of power. Okay, that's what Freud believed. So the girl blames her mother for her own lack of penis. She believes that her mother has castrated her already. She notices she's not got anything down there, and this causes penis envy. She wants that status symbol. So now her sexual desires are focused on her opposite sex parent, and that's obviously her father. She desires a penis as it is a symbol of power, and she desires her father because he has what she wants. This then transfers, so this is called the penis baby making project. So this penis envy stops and it's now transferred to want for a baby. She realises that her mother has had a baby and she wants to identify and do the same. So moving on to female identification and internalisation. So how do females identify with their mother and internalise those behaviours? So the conflict at this, in terms of the Electra complex, slightly different than the Oedipus complex. The conflict is made up of competition versus fear of losing mother. So she's worried that she will lose her mother because the way that she feels and because of these desires that she has. She's afraid of losing her mother's attention and her mother's affection, and this is what causes the conflict for the Electra complex. So to resolve that conflict, the girl identifies with the mother. She takes on the female gender identity and takes on those attitudes and behaviours. Now Freud said that female identification was not as strong as male identification, and the reason is the fear of castration is not as strong with females than it is in males, because obviously the females believe they've already been castrated. So the fear for the Oedipus complex is the fear of castration. This fear is a little bit less severe. It's a fear of losing mother. She's got no reason to fear castration because she believes it's already happened. Therefore, she's got less to lose. And again, confusion about gender identity comes from an unresolved complex. So if they don't resolve this conflict between competition and fear of losing mother, again, this can lead to gender identity issues. So differences between the complexes. Males, so the Oedipus complex, they actively identify with the father, whereas Freud said that the females passively identify, and this leads to males becoming more active and dominant and females becoming more timid and submissive. So to test yourself, without looking at this video or your pre-reading, make sure that you can create a flowchart for the process of the Oedipus complex. Make sure you can do the same for the Electra complex. Link both to gender identity and create a Venn diagram of similarities and differences between the two complexes. There are some similarities between the two, but remember I've drawn out some differences there as well.